Hello, everybody. I'm here with Yvonne Harrison, Women in Football CEO. Hi, Yvonne.
Hello, great to meet you.
I'm sorry for my very funny background, but I'm in Greece in Naxos, starting my holidays with the family for August. Yvonne seems in a more serious environment, I would say.
I'm in my home office in the lovely Manchester, which today is not raining, but is looking a bit grim out the window, if I'm honest.
So I think what caught my attention is that you just published and discussed, I think, even yesterday with your team, a survey and a report that just was out. And I think you had a lot of findings about women in sport and women in football. So maybe tell me about you and women in football in brief.
Yes, absolutely. So, Women in Football is a membership organisation. It's free to join, and it's here to support people that want to create gender equality within the football industry. So, our membership is about 80% women and 20% male non-binary members. That's really important because everybody has a role around gender equality, not just women. Um, the organisation supports individuals through sharing our expertise. We have lots of different training opportunities. We also celebrate successes and really showcase the amazing women that work within the football industry. And we also call out discrimination, support people who are actually kind of experiencing discrimination. We offer free legal support through Mishcon who provide that for us. We then also support the industry itself. So we have our members, and we have over 7,000 members of Women in Football, and about a social following of over 70,000 very engaged, very supportive members. And then we move on to the organisations that work in the industry. So what we found is you can support individuals, and that's really important. But if the environments then that they go back to in their organisations aren't really there to nurture, develop, and realise the potential of our members, then that's a problem. So we work with organisations like Premier League, various football clubs, organisations that support the football industry, whether that's financial services, whether that's legal, brands that work in football, to actually help them to understand what it's like to be a female working in the industry, some of the challenges, and more importantly, what they can do as organisations to create more inclusive environments. So we're really proud of what we do. We're a relatively small team, packing a big punch, and making waves in the industry because it's really important that the industry embraces everything that women has to offer.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I think the best way, as I know that you just went out with an interview with Fearless Ventures, I guess, that has a lot about you. I watched it all of it, and it's available on YouTube. I will put the link somewhere, depending on the channel. And it's really deep on your organization, your story, what you're doing. I found certain parts so resonating because my wife has been a woman in football with my kids playing in football with my boy. And there's a lot of story, even in a 1 year experience. So, and not
Right.
nice stories, not nice stories. So I totally find things that you said that were like, exactly, like, this is what happened to
Yeah.
us. So the good thing is that I'm a bit of a data freak, and I like to see statistics. And I like women in football as a concept and the activity you're doing. So I know this is some slides, or at least a shorter version of it. Maybe go through this. I think this one is exactly what you said before: celebrate achievement, challenge discrimination, and share expertise. Let's go to the first stat that I think is the more maybe generic one, and I let you comment the good and the bad part of what you found out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been surveying our members for close to a decade now. This is the third survey that we've done. And so what we've looked at is where we currently are, but also what's the trend in terms of kind of the direction of travel within the football industry. So as you can see here, 82% of our members that responded talked about that they have experienced discrimination in the workforce, and that is within the football industry. So our survey back in 2020 had a figure that was less than that. It was 66%. So the reality is more women are experiencing discrimination, which is concerning. But there are two ways of looking at this. One is the number of cases of discrimination are going up. Secondly, is an aspect where actually women are less tolerant of what perhaps
Yeah.
would have been considered as, just the environment, the culture. We just have to put up with that. So actually, it's more commonly known and accepted in terms of what constitutes discrimination, and therefore it's reported more widely. And I think there's probably an element of both of those when we've spoken to members, and we've certainly had discussions around this. I think the interesting thing from a point of view of debate is really why, if 82% of our members are experiencing discrimination, why are only 23% reporting it? And back in 2020, only 12% of people reported that. So there's a real kind of moment really to consider across the industry, and for organisations in the industry to go, if this volume of people are experiencing discrimination and only this level are reporting it, there is a disconnect, or there's something wrong with the environments within which we operate that are not making women feel like they can be open and honest about what's happening to them in the workplace. And if I was a CEO in any organisation, that would be greatly concerning to me. So I think some of our kind of messages and support to the industry is having policies and processes in place and communicated in and of itself is not enough. You have to create an environment where women do not feel fearful of saying, this has happened to me, or worried about what the repercussions of that are. Are you going to be seen as a troublemaker? Is that going to affect your next promotion? Are your colleagues going to look at you differently? Are you going to be that awkward one that's kind of, going overboard? And these are genuine fears that our members tell us exist. And I think that's why the reporting levels are so low. But the positive we can take from it is more people than ever before are reporting this. So there's progression in the right direction in that sense, but obviously it raises lots and lots of questions.
So what you're saying, basically, even if compared to the past, maybe the tools and the system are in place and the processes, it depends where the culture is. And even if the culture is there, how authentically women in this case, or underrepresented communities, really feel it's a true culture. Because you can have all the steps, but then you don't trust it. And that's it. And it's enough not to report, I guess.
Yeah, and actually that's supported by the fact that when we delve deeper into that, so if you have experienced discrimination and if you've reported it, we ask the question, what happened? Was there any action taken?
Exactly.
And over 3/4 of the women that responded to that was nothing. Nothing. They didn't see anything happening. So if you think about that in the context of an office environment, for example, you're having a conversation with a colleague, and maybe there's something that's happened in the workplace that you're not quite comfortable with, and often women will question themselves. Am I being a bit sensitive to this? Am I overreacting? Is it me? And so they will have conversations around, oh, this has happened to me. What do you think? And somebody go, yeah, well, you know what? It's totally unacceptable. And it happened to me too. And then the natural question is, well, what did you do about it? Did you say anything? Yeah, I told my line manager, actually. Oh, and what happened? If 3/4 of them women then turn around and say nothing, if I'm stood there, I'd be thinking, well, if nothing's going to happen and I'm putting myself out there, maybe I'll just keep this to myself and get my head down. The problem with that is then that cultural piece. You're not shifting culture. You're not changing behaviors in the workplace because they're not being challenged. And there's different ways of challenging, but it's a really important issue. We have to see action. And action can be all different levels. It's not about, this something happened that's relatively minor. Somebody gets sacked as a result. That's not what we're saying at all. But you have to challenge behaviours in order to create change in organisations. And that's not just a football or a sport thing. That's organisations full stop.
And sorry, not to stay too much on the first task because I want to go through, but one curiosity I have, because I've seen different behaviors, and I don't like to go generational, like the Gen Z, etc. But you see a lower level of acceptance of this kind of things by the younger generation. Is it something you observed, or I have, but I don't have your data, so sorry.
Yeah. It was interesting actually, because the respondents were really varied in terms of role, seniority, and also age profile. We had a really good split. So I can't come on the very specifics of that age demographic with what the data said. I don't have that in front of me right now. But anecdotally, what I can say is that over half of our members are under the age of 35. So you have got that younger generation coming through. We know when you look at data around that generation, and particularly from a women's football perspective, you know, it can be quite an activist, social, kind of purpose, justice kind of audience from a fan perspective. So no doubt that will translate into the workforce as well. And I think we do see, you know, generational differences. What was okay in the 1970s for people that were in the workforce then is absolutely not okay now. And, you know, we've heard that from both women and men that have worked, you know, at that time and are, you know, further advanced in their careers now and maybe in their 50s, 60s, compared with somebody in their 30s, 40s, compared to somebody, you know, who's just early career and coming in. So I think there definitely is a generational shift, because there is in society, you know, what is widely accepted and normal in society now is very different from what was 20 years ago. We just look at it. If you go back on YouTube and look at some TV adverts, you know, talk about gender stereotyping, some of it's utterly horrific. And you just think, how on earth was that accepted and norm? But it was back in the day. The point is now, I think it's about, for us anyway, a lot of this is about education and bringing to the fore that these are very much issues that are happening now, and there's very much things that can be done to change the way that the football industry in the main potentially behaves. And we see some great examples of best practice within our corporate member network and within the industry, but it's just not enough, and it's not enough scale and the pace of change that we're seeing. Yes, you know, reporting is getting better, but it's so slow. And actually we have to push on. Sport can really make a difference, both in the world of its own industry, but in society more broadly. So it has a role to play in the younger generation will be a really important factor in that.
So let's go. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. This is sexism. So you're going more specific, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, sexism was 40% of our members working in football have experienced sexism in the workplace. Now, I guess from that point of view, if you look at it, that's nearly half of your workforce.
Yes.
You know, if you've got a gender split of 50, it's one in two
Yeah.
people. If you're sat in a room, you look to the left. If it isn't you, it's them. That's unbelievable. And you know, it's not something that we are clearly happy about. And I don't think anybody, whether you're working in the industry or you're a manager in an industry, nobody wants to see that. It has improved. That figure has come down from 2020, and that's really important. And we also see where it's specifically around sexism, we see a higher percentage of people reporting this. So, you know, discrimination, you've got a continuum, as you will, in terms of sexism, but it is important that you kind of flag that there is a higher reporting rate. Again, potentially suggesting that what was once acceptable is, you know, not, and actually people are having more confidence. We'd like to think that people that work with women in football, you know, our members are supported, they're part of a community, they can access free legal advice, and actually they, in being part of that, have the confidence to challenge where things are not okay and where they are experiencing these things in work. At the end of the day, we spend an awfully long time in the workplace, and it's important that we can thrive. All people can thrive. It's not just here about, you know, gender. I mean, if you are a woman, but you're not heterosexual, or if you're a woman of colour, you know, there are different layers of discrimination that then come into that space and make it even harder. So it's really important. I take encouragement from the fact more people are reporting sexism, and the figures of sexism have gone down, but still nearly 1 in 2, and that's just not good enough in this day and age.
And the next one is even more worrying, or maybe, I think.
Yeah, this has increased. So when we look at different forms of discrimination, I mean, it can vary from, you know, derogatory comments on your ability based on your gender. And we've all heard that scream like a girl, throw like a girl, like that's a bad thing. We know these things exist. It can be sexist banter. It can be sexism itself, you know, but sexual harassment, I mean, this is really serious. And nearly 1 in, you know, if we had 5 women in a room, 1 in 5 are experiencing this in their workplace.
Yeah.
You know, it's absolutely unacceptable, and this has gone up since we last asked the question. So
how do you read this going up? Sorry, Yvonne. How do you read this going up? What's your reading of this going up? Because
Yeah, so well, back in 2016, when the question was asked, the figure was 15%, and now it's 18%. So we know it's gone up in terms of the number of people that are experiencing that. Is that because more women are coming into the industry? Is that, you know,
Uh,
there are more questions to be asked around this in particular, and some of the others, actually what departments are people working in? Is this the on pitch stuff, the off pitch? We don't know. It's hard to say that the whole industry has an issue here with that. Is it specific departments within football? Is it specific types of organisations? It requires further level of sort of investigation and research. But the on the cold face, more women are experiencing sexual harassment in the football industry, and that is not okay.
Yeah, clear. And I think this is more a summary, and it's maybe a bit difficult to read, but there is a level of different things that are impacting women in this case.
Yeah.
And I think the first one is the banter, which is like, come on, there was a case on Italian television during, I think, was the diving. It was horrible, like two men, and there was one in Formula One in Italy, and there's been a lot of debate. But it's like, the fact that this happens, it means that you're going on air to say things like that. It means your environment, day by day, it's like that. Because otherwise, I mean, unless you're, I don't know, something crazy happening in that moment in your life, I mean, how do you do it? I mean, if you don't do it every day, you won't do it on air, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, it's like it's normal, and it's not normal. And I speak to lots of different organizations, I talk at lots of different conferences, and actually the thing that I always come back to on this one, jokes that were deemed acceptable 15, 20, even 10 years ago, society has moved on, thankfully, and they're not acceptable now. And I always pose the question, if that joke, if that banter as such was directed and your daughter was on the receiving end of that, or your mother was in the room listening to that, or your niece, would you be okay with it? And if the answer is no, then you really need to question why it's okay with other female colleagues. And one of the biggest things that we see, and we know is going to be massively important in the cultural shift, is around allyship and people calling it out for what it is. So, for example, if there was a joke directed at a colleague, a female colleague, and there was a big group of people, and I was the person that said, "Hey, come on, I don't think that's okay," it would land to a certain degree. But if, Carlo, you said to your male colleague, "Hang on a minute, that's not okay," that would hit differently, because you are more like your male colleague than I am. And also, of course, you would expect me to say something because I'm going to stick up for, the women and so there is a real importance around allyship and that education piece, and people understanding that, you can't just be a bystander in culture and assume, oh, it wasn't me, I didn't say it. You're complicit because you're there and you're not saying anything. Just like, for areas where people are experiencing other forms of discrimination, it's not okay. We must recognize the privilege that we have, and we must talk about the fact that some of these things are not okay. And there are different ways of dealing with that, whether that's in the group, outside of the group, however. But the point is, it should be addressed. And it's not just the women's job to address sexism, banter, gender inequality. It really isn't.
I agree, and I have direct experience with that. I also learned that allyship is something you have to learn. It's not like the obvious. So we're together and someone says something inappropriate, and with you there, to you, for example, with you there, I immediately intervene and say, that's not okay. In that case, I should talk to you before or check, because you don't want me to defend. Maybe you're able to reply yourself. So it's a very subtle. So allyship is something you have to learn. I have experienced it a lot of times, and it's not obvious. You need to learn how to do it. You need to talk to people, and so it's. I think it's important. I was at the conference, and then there was the usual women panel talking about women in sport, in this case in the broadcast industry. And one of my friends, she's a CTO of a big media organization, and she said, I don't want to be in panel anymore. I mean, you created the problem, you solved the problem. I want to do my job. I'm okay for a while, but I want to see a panel for once, all created with men that discuss how they will solve these things. It's a bit of a provocation, but I initially said, "Oh, what you're saying," and then I liked it a lot, to be honest.
I get it. It's about disrupting the norm. I've spoke at so many conferences about gender equality, both in sport and in football, and been talking to rooms full of women. And I've stood on the stage and I've said,
"You agree?"
We all get it. Like we need it flipping. The audience needs to be more men than women. And actually, come up with the solutions, because the problem was created in many ways by the way society has evolved, and men have been largely dictating that. So I agree.
Yeah. So the next one.
However,
sorry, go
just a caveat. I think it's everybody's problem. It's everybody's problem, and we should be co-designing the solutions together, because you have to understand from anybody's perspective what it feels like to, what are the issues and what does it feel like. And men can't create the solutions necessarily because they don't necessarily wholly understand the problem. So you've got to get everybody in a room, and that's where that allyship, that education, that co-design piece is so important.
I agree. So the next one, very quickly, because you touched upon it, is a difficult word: intersectionality. You may have, so it's not only about being a woman, but you can have a lot of combined underrepresented groups in you, like you're a woman, you may be Black, you may be 60 and things like that. So even understanding that is, again, it's a bit sophisticated, but I think it's important as you progress. I think it's a journey. I mean, for me, it has been a journey, to be honest, to understand.
Yeah, it is. But the positive thing is you're taking responsibility to educate yourself. You're kind of out there seeking this information and going, well, what part can I play? And it is a journey, but sometimes we can all be guilty of, well, it's your job to educate me. Well, no, it's not. It's your job to seek out the information, and we'll be happy to sort of share that with you. And that goes around all different forms of discrimination and underrepresented groups, and because it's important that we all take personal responsibility for our knowledge and our behavior.
Yeah. And the next one, again, a bit of terminology, EDI terminology, conscious and unconscious bias. Can you define it quickly for everybody before you discuss this, what you find out?
Yeah, I mean, I think with these terms, they've become much more known and widespread. So the conscious bias is, that ultimately you have a bias towards a certain thing or a certain person or a view, and you're very aware of it. Whereas unconscious, actually, it might be because you've been raised in a certain household or a certain community, and you've not been exposed to certain things, and therefore you naturally talk about things in a certain way, and you're not necessarily aware that could be offensive or cause a problem to other people. These are two major factors. And what was interesting about the survey was that unconscious bias was obviously rated quite highly in terms of one of the major challenges for women in the football industry, but so was conscious bias. So people being aware of almost being aware of what they're doing and why, and that they're doing it, but actually not bothered. I think that's the really interesting thing that emerged for me. We've definitely seen a bigger uptake of unconscious bias training and things like that in recent years. And I think it's positive, but you could almost hide behind, with unconscious bias, you could almost hide behind, well, I didn't know, I wasn't aware, therefore my behavior is okay. And it isn't okay. So it goes back to that point of educating yourself and really seeking out information to know how you can contribute to a workplace, and you can be more inclusive in your approach and bring people into conversations and recognize some of the challenges that they might face. And that requires you to seek out that information. And it, from an employer point of view, they should be providing some of that and make it as easy as possible for employees, really. So that's the interesting one. I think if you, in the debate yesterday, when we went through on a webinar our survey results, there was a really interesting comment made from one of the panelists around active bystander training rather than unconscious bias. So you can't hide behind that. It's kind of like almost within environments, these things happen, and these are some of the reasons. And it goes back to being passive or not, or kind of in and around but not speaking up. So what can you do if you hear these things that you now know are not okay? Whether you did or you didn't before is irrelevant. Now you know what you're going to do about it. And I just thought that was really interesting. It's definitely something I'm keen to sort of unpick a little bit more, really.
Yeah, good. So not to take too much of your time, let's end on some positive note, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of optimism in here. Absolutely.
Yeah, the number is huge. I
Yeah,
mean, 89%.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because despite the backdrop of the discrimination, of increased levels of discrimination, and some of the major challenges people are facing, there is a real optimism of women working in the industry, around this industry, and the prospects for women here. I think that's really, really important, and it's grown significantly since the last time we did the survey. And there's also a statistic as well, around 67% of the women in football feeling like they can excel in this industry. So that's a really positive note to finish on. When you give the context, I mean, it's great anyway, but when you have that context of everything that women are facing, and still the glass is half full, very much half full, I think that's quite exciting. And, there's a number of things that will play into that. I think there are more, the community is very strong, it's very united. We have women of all ages, all types of roles, that are part of our community. And when we have our events and people come for the first time, or even have been time and time again, just say, you feel like you belong, and you feel like you're not on your own. And that's important, because depending on what kind of role you're in the football industry, you can be on your own. You can be that only woman in that department, and you stand out therefore as a result. So it's important we have more women in all kinds of roles, because then you're not the only one, and more of one is definitely helpful. But there is absolutely an optimism, and I sense that. And I also think maybe the growth of the women's game, the visibility the women's game is getting, is also contributing to that, because it's more visible, and more people are talking about how exciting women's football is. And I think that's really important, from our point of view, in terms of the whole workforce across football. Most of our members currently work in the men's game. That's where the majority of jobs are. That's where most of the infrastructure is. But we'll certainly start to see that shift, I think, as more and more roles become available in the women's game, and the leagues professionalise even further than we have with the Barclays Women's Super League and Barclays Women's Championship. So it's an exciting time to be involved in the industry. I think the industry is more tuned into gender equality. When we look at the work that the EFL have done around their Together strategy, the Premier League working on a gender equality strategy, it's not kind of gender is coming into the forefront in and of itself now, as opposed to being bracketed in this other forms of discrimination. Women are not underrepresented in society. We make up half of the population.
Yeah.
So therefore we shouldn't be underrepresented in a workforce or anything else. And yet we are. And particularly as you kind of climb up the ladder, less and less women feel kind of supported into those senior management and board positions. And that's obviously something that we will be very strongly focusing on as well at Women in Football. But that optimism is there. And, if anybody is keen to work in this industry, already works in it, cares about gender equality in football, and wants to, make a difference, then join us. It's free to join, and we'd love to have you.
Great. And the last one, I think, is 67% of women believe football is a sector where women can excel. I think it's what you said before, but what I notice is it's another, whatever, 1/3 more than 2020. So, which is not that far away, apart the pandemic, right? So that's exactly. Also another positive note. One thing that I also wanted to, sorry, go, Yvonne.
No, I was just going to say it's positive, and we're really happy about that.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to share, and for a moment we'll go off screen, there is a QR code just to find Women in Football. So as you said, everybody that wants to join it, there is an easy way, and you have a lot of amazing people in your organization. So thank you for doing this. I think it was really good to go through a bit of, with some time through the rationale to exactly what is happening. One last question is, do you think the next steps, so the action list, imagine this was a board, what are the action lists for you?
I think there's a couple of things really. One is to take this research and, spread it around the industry, make sure it stays on people's radar, because it's the largest survey of its kind. It's the most recent data that anybody will have, and it's a very accurate barometer of where women are within the industry and how they're feeling. So it's about spreading the word, which is why it's great to join you today. Secondly, is for us to specifically work with our corporate members to kind of deep dive into their organisations, because they're the ones that have already made the commitment. They're corporate members of Women in Football. They're already very much committed to gender equality in their industry. So let's help and accelerate with them. And the third thing really is for us to kind of ask more questions as a result of the research and start to understand from our members, what does this mean for you? What can be done? What do you want to see? Because, we're here on behalf of our members. And when we go in and advocate with, whether policy, whether that's government, so around the Karen Carney review as an example, and the recommendations that came out of that specifically to women's football, recommendation number 4 was around the workforce. It was around data. It was around, transparency of that data. So I think women's football is going to be leading the way in terms of workforce data, and then a workforce strategy that sort of sits behind that. We would want to see that obviously expand right across the game, not just in women's football, but actually utilising some of these opportunities to lobby and advocate at, that government and policy level, but also with our key stakeholders, the Premier League, the EFL, the FA, and actually, make workforce a key priority. Because when we look at the growth of the women's game as well, there'll be a whole range of players who currently play that are not going to have the long careers and not going to be able to just retire on the basis of playing football. They're too far on now. So actually, we've got to make sure we can transition people into really meaningful careers in the football industry and not lose all of that memory and kind of their experiences out of the game into other industries, because it's important that we retain that. So there's definitely action on the back of it in terms of raising awareness, raising more questions, and kind of keeping this top of profile, and also looking at how the industry can collaborate, because no one organisation in football is going to solve the inequities that exist across the board, never mind with gender equality. So we have to do it together. And, we're really happy, proud to play a part in that, but we also know we need other people to join us.
As you mentioned player, I noticed that there could be an opportunity in supporting women football players in this case, or athletes, with technology. For example, I recently started mentoring a startup called Wonko that has certain nutrition programs to help athletes during menstruation, for example, and even women in business, by the way. We saw recently the FIFA World Cup in Australia and New Zealand that there were a lot of ACL injuries, maybe because a lot of things are not done for women. And that's true for athletes and for women in business. So that's an area of opportunity that, as you were saying, I mean, there is a workforce coming also from players. So I think there are a lot of opportunities coming from this ecosystem, not only for players, not only for women in football, but it's a bigger ecosystem that maybe we realize today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually just launched an entrepreneurship program with Zero last week. So we're looking for women who are wanting to start their own businesses connected to football to join us, to come through a program, to be mentored, to be supported. Because we recognise that, there are opportunities, and often, particularly when you look at kind of footwear, and Laura Youngson, who's one of the ambassadors of that program, and Ida, and Boots for Women's Feet, and some of the research that the ECA have done around that now. There's a real need, and sometimes women just get on and do it. So let's give them the support. You might be well placed to work in a club or in an environment. You also might want to just do it yourself, and we've got that support now with Zero, which is brilliant.
Great to finish with an innovation part of the talk. Okay, thank you, Yvonne. I'll let you go back to your day and your August. It was really nice talking to you. And maybe let's talk again in 2-3 years.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Enjoy your holiday.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.